The rain came down hard that Monday morning, the kind that soaks through your jacket in seconds. Rebecca Chen pulled into the parking lot of St. Catherine's Medical Center and sat in her car for a moment, watching the drops race down her windshield. Today was supposed to be her big day, the official start of her new position as hospital administrator. But she had other plans. For the past 2 weeks, Rebecca had been working from home, buried in paperwork and video calls, getting briefed on budgets and policies. Everyone kept telling her how excited the staff was to meet her, how they'd planned a welcome breakfast, how they wanted to show her the best version of the hospital. That's exactly what worried her. She didn't want the polished tour. She didn't want smiling faces putting on a show. Rebecca had turned around 3 failing hospitals in her career, and she'd learned something important along the way. You don't learn the truth about a place from conferences rooms and prepared presentations. You learn it by watching when people think nobody important is looking. So instead of her usual blazer and dress pants, Rebecca wore jeans and a simple sweater, no makeup, hair in a ponytail, looking like anyone who might be visiting a patient. She grabbed her umbrella and headed inside, just another face in the crowd. The hospital lobby buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. An elderly man shuffled toward the elevator with his walker. A young couple stood at the information desk looking confused and worried. The coffee shop line stretched halfway across the atrium. Rebecca took it all in, noting the scuffed floors and the flickering light above the pharmacy entrance. Already she was learning. She wandered through the hallways, peeking into different departments. The gift shop where a volunteer restocked flowers. The physical therapy wing where patients worked through their exercises. Everything seemed normal, functioning. Maybe a bit worn around the edges, but nothing alarming. Then she found herself in the emergency department. The waiting room was packed. Every seat taken, some people standing against the walls. The air smelled like antiseptic and anxiety. A television in the corner played the morning news, but nobody was watching. They were all lost in their own worries, their own pain, their own fear. That's when Rebecca noticed her. A young mother sat in the corner looking absolutely exhausted. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her eyes had that glazed look of someone who hasn't slept in days. And in her arms, a little boy, maybe 2 years old, was crying. Not the angry tantrum kind of crying, the miserable, sick kind that breaks your heart. The mother kept touching his forehead, whispering to him, trying to rock him. But nothing worked. The boy's face was flushed red, and even from across the room, Rebecca could tell he was burning up with fever. Rebecca knew she should just observe. That's what she came here to do. Watch and learn. But years of medical training and basic human compassion made it impossible to just stand there. Before she could talk herself out of it, she walked over. "Hey there," Rebecca said softly, crouching down to the mother's level. "Rough morning?" The mother looked up, and Rebecca could see tears threatening to spill over. "He's been crying for 3 hours. The fever won't break. They said it'll be another hour before we can see a doctor. I don't know what to do anymore. Mind if I try something?" Rebecca asked gently. The mother nodded, too tired to question it. Rebecca pulled out her phone and opened a simple game with bright colors and silly sounds. She held it where the little boy could see it, making funny faces and voices. Slowly the crying quieted to whimpering. The boy's attention caught on the dancing characters on the screen. It wasn't much, but it was something. The mother exhaled, her shoulders dropping an inch. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just needed a minute where he wasn't crying. Just 1 minute." Rebecca smiled and started to say something else when a sharp voice cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Rebecca looked up to see a nurse standing over them. The woman was probably in her late 40s, with short brown hair pulled back tight and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many double shifts. Her name tag read Diana Ross, RN. Her jaw was clenched and her arms were crossed. "I was just helping," Rebecca said, standing up slowly. "The little one was having a hard time." "The waiting room has rules," Diana said, her voice loud enough that other people turned to look. "Visitors cannot interfere with patients. You're creating a disruption." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause any problems. I just thought, that's the issue." "You thought? You don't work here. You don't know these people or their situations. We have protocols for a reason." Diana's voice carried that edge of someone who'd reached their breaking point hours ago and was running on pure frustration. Rebecca kept her voice calm and quiet. "You're absolutely right. I apologize. I'll move to another area. But Diana wasn't done. The floodgates had opened, and all the stress of the morning, maybe the whole week, came pouring out. People like you come in here thinking you know better than the medical professionals. We're understaffed, we're overwhelmed, and the last thing we need is someone playing doctor in the waiting room. Several staff members had stopped what they were doing. A young guy pushing a supply cart froze, his eyes going wide. An older nurse at the desk half stood, like she was thinking about intervening but wasn't sure how. "I really am sorry," Rebecca said again. "I can see you're having a difficult day and I don't want to add to it." The young mother looked mortified, like she'd somehow caused this conflict. The little boy had started crying again, triggered by the tense voices around him. Diana's face softened for just a second when she saw the child crying, but she didn't back down. "If you want to help so badly, the best thing you can do is follow the rules and let us do our jobs." Rebecca nodded slowly. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the waiting room on them. She could pull out her ID right now, could end this with 2 words. But what would that teach her? What would that tell her about how this hospital really worked? About who Diana really was when she wasn't performing for administrators? "You're right," Rebecca said quietly. "Thank you for your dedication to keeping patients safe. I can see you care a lot about doing things the right way." She turned to the young mother. "I hope your little one feels better soon." Then she walked away, heading back toward the elevator. Behind her, she could hear Diana muttering something to the other nurses. Could hear the awkward shuffle of the waiting room returning to its normal sounds. Rebecca hit the elevator button and waited. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't angry. If anything, she was more determined than ever. Because what she'd just witnessed told her everything she needed to know about St. Catherine's Medical Center. The staff was drowning. They were stretched so thin that a simple act of kindness looked like interference. A nurse with clear passion and dedication had been pushed to the point where she was snapping at strangers in the waiting room. This wasn't a personnel problem. This was a system problem. And Rebecca had about 3 hours before the entire hospital found out exactly who she was. The elevator dinged open. Rebecca stepped inside and pressed the button for the administrative floor. She had a lot of work to do before that staff meeting, and one nurse in particular, who was about to have a very interesting day. Diana stood in the middle of the emergency department waiting room, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. The stranger had walked away so calmly, so gracefully, that it almost made Diana feel worse. She'd expected an argument, maybe some pushback. Instead, she got a polite apology and genuine kindness. "It didn't sit right. You okay?" Diana turned to see Patricia, the charge nurse, standing beside her with a concerned expression. Patricia had been at St. Catherine's for 20 years and had seen it all. She had that steady, unshakable presence that came from decades of emergency medicine. "I'm fine," Diana said, but her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Just tired of people who don't understand how hospitals work." Patricia raised an eyebrow. That woman seemed pretty harmless. She was just entertaining a sick kid. It's not about harm. It's about protocol. Diana walked back toward the nurse's station, needing to put distance between herself and the growing guilt in her chest. "We have rules for a reason. You can't just let random people interact with patients however they want." "Fair enough," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite agree, "but maybe you could have handled it a bit more gently." She looked nice. Diana wanted to defend herself, to explain that after 16 hours of back-to-back shifts, after dealing with impossible patient loads and broken equipment and administration that never listened, she'd earned the right to be a little sharp. But she didn't have the energy. Instead, she grabbed a patient chart and buried herself in work. The thing was, Diana knew she'd been harsh. She'd replayed the scene in her head a dozen times already, and each time she cringed a little more at her own tone. The woman hadn't been rude or aggressive. She hadn't tried to diagnose anyone or pretend to be medical staff. She'd just tried to help a crying child, but Diana couldn't take it back now. And honestly, part of her still felt justified. This hospital had ground her down to nothing over the past year. Budget cuts meant they were always short-staffed. Equipment requests went ignored. Patient safety concerns fell on deaf ears. And through it all, Diana showed up every single day because she cared, because these patients deserved someone who would fight for them, even when she was exhausted. Maybe she'd taken that frustration out on the wrong person. But where else was it supposed to go? 20 minutes later, Diana was checking vitals on a patient when she heard whispers at the nurse's station. She glanced over and saw 3 of her colleagues huddled together, talking in low voices and occasionally looking her way. Kevin, a young orderly who'd only been at the hospital for 6 months, caught her eye and quickly looked away. That was odd. Kevin was usually friendly, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood during tough shifts. Diana finished with her patient and walked over. "What's going on?" The group went quiet. Patricia cleared her throat. "Nothing. Just hospital gossip about me." Diana's stomach tightened. Another nurse, Helen, spoke up hesitantly. "That woman you were talking to in the waiting room. Did you see what she looked like? What she was wearing? Jeans and a sweater, so what?" Helen pulled out her phone and opened the hospital's website. She navigated to the administration page and turned the screen toward Diana. "Did she look anything like this?" Diana stared at the photo. It showed a professional woman in a blazer, dark hair styled perfectly, smiling confidently at the camera. The caption underneath read, "Dr. Rebecca Chen, Hospital Administrator. Joining St. Catherine's Medical Center, October 2024. The blood drained from Diana's face. "That's not... she didn't look like..." "People look different in professional photos," Kevin said quietly. "But I was moving supplies past the waiting room when you were talking to her. I thought she looked familiar. Then I remembered seeing her picture in the announcement email last week." Diana felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "Why didn't you say something?" Kevin shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I wasn't sure, and by the time I was sure, it seemed too late. You were already, already humiliating the new boss in front of half the emergency department." Diana's hands gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. This couldn't be happening. After 15 years of dedicated service to this hospital, after countless overtime shifts and missed family dinners and putting her patients above everything else, she'd just destroyed her career in 5 minutes of bad judgment. "Are you absolutely certain it was her?" Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia pulled up the email on her own phone, the one sent to all staff 2 weeks ago announcing the new administration. The professional photo was different from the woman Diana had confronted, but when she really looked at the face, the eyes, the shape of the features, her stomach dropped. It was her. No question. "Oh God," Diana breathed. "What have I done?" "Look, maybe it's not as bad as you think," Patricia tried, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe she'll understand you were stressed." "I told her she was interfering with patients. I said people like her don't understand how hospitals work. I told the new hospital administrator that she doesn't understand how hospitals work." Diana's voice was rising, panic setting in. "I'm going to be fired. I have 2 kids in college. I can't lose this job." Helen put a hand on her shoulder. "Diana, breathe. Let's not panic yet." But Diana couldn't breathe. Her mind raced through the implications. She thought about her mortgage, her student loans, her elderly mother's medical bills. She thought about starting over at a new hospital at 47 years old, trying to explain in interviews why she left St. Catherine's. She thought about the shame of it all, the whispers that would follow her. "There's a mandatory staff meeting in 2 hours," Kevin said softly. "They're introducing her officially. Maybe you can apologize then?" Diana shook her head. "In front of everyone? After what I did? She's probably already calling HR to have me escorted out." The rest of her shift passed in a blur of dread. Diana went through the motions, checking patients, updating charts, administering medications. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation over and over, thinking of all the things she should have said differently, all the ways she could have handled it better. She kept expecting security to show up, kept expecting a call to the administrative office. But nothing came. The silence was somehow worse than any confrontation would have been. When her shift finally ended, Diana considered skipping the staff meeting. She could call in sick, buy herself a few more hours before facing the consequences, but that felt cowardly. If she was going to lose her job, at least she'd face it with dignity. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, moving slowly. The exhaustion of the double shift had caught up with her, making her arms and legs feel like lead. She splashed water on her face, trying to look less like she'd been up for 20 hours straight. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The dark circles, the deep lines around her eyes, the gray creeping into her hair. When had she gotten so worn down? When had this job that she loved started to feel like a weight crushing her? Diana thought about that woman, Dr. Chen, crouching down to help a crying child. She'd looked genuinely kind, genuinely concerned. and Diana had treated her like an annoyance, like a problem to be managed. Even if Dr. Chen hadn't been the new administrator, Diana wasn't proud of how she'd acted. That wasn't who she wanted to be. The auditorium was already filling up when Diana arrived. She slipped in through a side door and made her way to the back row, hoping to disappear into the crowd. But several colleagues spotted her, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to curious to slightly gleeful. Hospital gossip spread faster than any virus. Diana sank into a seat near the exit, ready to make a quick escape if needed. On stage, the podium stood empty, a microphone waiting. In 30 minutes, maybe less, she'd know her fate. She'd worked so hard for so long. She'd sacrificed so much. And it might all end because she'd had one bad morning and taken it out on the wrong person. Diana closed her eyes and waited for the meeting to begin. The auditorium filled quickly. Diana watched from her corner seat as nurses, doctors, orderlies, administrative staff, and maintenance workers filed in. Some looked excited, chatting with colleagues about the new leadership. Others looked tired, like they'd rather be anywhere else. A few kept glancing back at Diana with knowing looks that made her want to sink through the floor. She checked her phone. 12 minutes until the meeting started. 12 minutes until her world potentially fell apart. Patricia slid into the seat next to her. "You don't have to sit back here alone." "I kind of do," Diana said quietly. "Everyone knows what I did. Not everyone. And the ones who do know aren't judging you as harshly as you're judging yourself." Patricia handed her a bottle of water. "Here, you look like you need it." Diana took it but didn't open it. Her hands were shaking too much anyway. "What do you think she'll do?" "Honestly, I have no idea. I've never met her." Patricia leaned back in her seat. "But I looked her up during lunch. Her track record is interesting. She turned around 3 hospitals that were about to close. Staff at those places say she actually listens, that she makes real changes. Great, so I yelled at someone who might have actually helped us." Diana laughed bitterly. "Perfect timing on my part." The lights dimmed slightly and a man in an expensive suit walked onto the stage. Diana recognized him as Robert Walsh, the hospital board chairman. He was the kind of person who showed up for photo opportunities and fundraising galas, but never seemed to know what actually happened in the hallways and patient rooms. "Good afternoon, everyone," Walsh said into the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to be here today." Diana wanted to laugh. Taking time? Like they had a choice. This was a mandatory meeting. Walsh launched into a speech about the hospital's history, its mission, its commitment to excellence. Standard corporate talk that probably sounded impressive to donors but meant nothing to the people who actually worked there. Diana tuned most of it out, her eyes fixed on the side entrance to the stage where she knew Dr. Chen would eventually appear. "Now, I know you're all eager to meet our new hospital administrator," Walsh continued. "We conducted an extensive search and received applications from across the country. But one candidate stood out above all others. Her experience speaks for itself. 3 hospitals saved from closure. Patient satisfaction scores increased by an average of 40% under her leadership. Staff retention rates that are the envy of the industry." Diana's stomach churned. This impressive person was about to walk on stage and see the nurse who'd publicly disrespected her, sitting in the back row. Maybe security was already waiting outside to escort her out after the meeting. "What makes Dr. Chen truly special," Walsh said, "is her commitment to frontline staff. She believes that the people who interact with patients every day are the heart of any hospital. She's known for her open-door policy, her willingness to work alongside staff, and her track record of actually implementing the changes that workers request." Great, Diana thought, so I yelled at the one administrator who might have actually cared about nurses. That's just my luck. "I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Rebecca Chen, your new hospital administrator." The auditorium erupted in polite applause. Diana's hand stayed frozen in her lap as she watched the woman from the waiting room walk onto the stage. But this wasn't the casual, approachable person in jeans and a sweater. This was a professional in a perfectly tailored navy suit, her hair styled, her presence commanding. She looked like someone who ran hospitals, someone who made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. Diana felt sick. Rebecca shook Walsh's hand and stepped up to the microphone. Her eyes scanned the crowd, seeming to take in every face. When her gaze passed over the back row, Diana was certain she paused for just a moment on her. But Rebecca's expression didn't change. No anger, no recognition, nothing. "Thank you, Robert," Rebecca began, her voice clear and confident. "And thank you all for being here. I know how valuable your time is, especially for those of you who are between shifts or covering for colleagues." That got people's attention. Most administrators didn't acknowledge the reality of hospital schedules. "I'm going to be honest with you," Rebecca continued. "I could stand up here and tell you about my credentials and my experience. I could make promises about all the ways I'm going to improve this hospital. But you've probably heard speeches like that before, and I'm guessing you're tired of empty words." A few people in the audience nodded. Diana found herself leaning forward despite her anxiety. "So instead, let me tell you what I did this morning. I came to this hospital early, dressed like a regular visitor, and I walked around. I wanted to see St. Catherine's the way patients see it, the way families see it, without the prepared presentations and the cleaned-up version that administrators usually get." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people looked intrigued. Others looked worried, probably wondering what she'd seen. "I saw a lot," Rebecca said. "I saw floors that need replacing, equipment that's outdated, waiting rooms that are overcrowded. These are things I can work on, things we can fix with time and budget allocations." She paused and her expression softened. "But I also saw something much more important. I saw staff who genuinely care. I saw a nurse who was so dedicated to protocols and patient safety that she was willing to confront a stranger who she thought was breaking the rules." Diana's heart stopped. Several people turned to look at her. Kevin, sitting 3 rows ahead, glanced back with wide eyes. "That nurse had probably worked a double shift," Rebecca continued. "She was exhausted. She was dealing with an overcrowded emergency department and limited resources. And yet, when she saw what she thought was a violation of protocol, she didn't let it slide. She spoke up." Diana couldn't breathe. Was this really happening? Now, was she right about the situation? No, the person she confronted was just trying to help a sick child. But you know what? Her instinct to protect patients, to maintain standards, to ensure that protocols exist for a reason, that instinct is exactly what makes good healthcare possible. Rebecca's eyes found Diana in the back row. This time there was no mistaking it. They made direct eye contact and Rebecca smiled. Not a smug smile or a sarcastic one, a genuine, warm smile. "I would much rather work with staff who care too much than staff who don't care at all," Rebecca said. "Passion can be redirected. Apathy can't be fixed." Diana felt tears prickling at her eyes. This wasn't what she'd expected. Not even close. "The previous administration kept you at arm's length," Rebecca continued, addressing the whole crowd again. "They made decisions in boardrooms without consulting the people who actually do the work. That changes now. Starting tomorrow, I'm implementing open office hours. Any staff member can schedule time to talk with me directly about concerns, suggestions, or problems that need solving." More murmurs, these ones sounding more hopeful. "I'm also creating departmental advisory committees. Each major department will elect representatives who will meet with me monthly to discuss resource needs, policy changes, and workflow improvements. Your voices matter. Your experiences matter, and I promise you I will listen." The applause started small but grew steadily. People were actually clapping with enthusiasm now, not just polite obligation. Rebecca wrapped up her speech with specifics about upcoming changes, budget priorities, and her timeline for assessments. But Diana barely heard any of it. Her mind was stuck on what had just happened. Dr. Chen had every reason to humiliate her, to call her out by name, to use her as an example of what not to do. Instead, she'd turned Diana's worst moment into a story about dedication and passion. She'd taken Diana's shame and somehow transformed it into something that sounded almost admirable. The meeting ended, and people started filing out. Diana stayed in her seat, unsure what to do next. Should she try to talk to Dr. Chen? Apologize again?
Pretend nothing happened?
"She's something else, isn't she?" Patricia said, still sitting beside her. "I don't understand," Diana whispered. "Why would she be so kind about what I did?" Patricia stood and stretched. Maybe because she meant what she said. Maybe she really does see value in people who care. But I was awful to her. "Yeah, you were." Patricia's bluntness was somehow comforting. "And she gave you grace anyway. The question is, what are you going to do with that second chance?" Diana watched as Dr. Chen left the stage, surrounded by board members and senior staff. She looked confident, capable, exactly like someone who knew how to lead. But Diana also remembered the woman in the waiting room, crouched down beside a scared mother and sick child, using her phone to make a toddler smile. Maybe, just maybe, St. Catherine's had finally found the kind of leader they needed, and maybe Diana hadn't destroyed her career after all, but she definitely owed someone an apology, a real one this time. Diana spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work up the courage to apologize. 3 times she walked toward the administrative wing. 3 times she turned around before reaching the door. What was she supposed to say? How do you apologize for something like that? By 4 o'clock, she'd talked herself out of it entirely. Dr. Chen was busy with board meetings and important administrator things. The last thing she needed was a random nurse showing up to grovel. Besides, Dr. Chen had been gracious at the meeting. Maybe that was enough. Maybe Diana should just let it go and move forward. She was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, pushing a wilted salad around her plate, when someone pulled out the chair across from her. Diana looked up and nearly choked. Dr. Rebecca Chen sat down with 2 cups of coffee and that same warm smile from the waiting room. She was still in her professional suit, but she'd loosened her collar and looked somehow more human than she had on stage. "Mind if I join you?" Rebecca asked, though she was already sitting. Of course." Diana's brain scrambled to form coherent words. "Dr. Chen, I'm so sorry. I was going to come find you. I just didn't know when." Rebecca held up a hand, stopping the rush of words. "Please call me Rebecca. And before you launch into an apology that I can see you've been rehearsing all afternoon, can I ask you something?" Diana nodded, not trusting her voice. "Why were you so upset this morning? And I don't mean at me specifically. I mean in general. What's really going on in the emergency department?" Of all the questions Diana expected, this wasn't one of them. She stared at Rebecca, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. But those eyes held genuine curiosity, genuine concern. "We're drowning," Diana finally said. "That's what's going on. We're drowning and nobody seems to care." Rebecca pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. "Tell me more." And somehow, sitting in that cafeteria with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of institutional food in the air, Diana started talking. Really talking. She told Rebecca about the staffing shortages that had them covering twice as many patients as they should, about the equipment that broke down constantly because it was so old, and how maintenance requests disappeared into a black hole, about the supply closets that were always running out of basic necessities because someone in purchasing cared more about budget numbers than patient care. "Last month, we had a patient coding, and the crash cart wouldn't work," Diana said, her voice cracking. "The battery was dead. We'd reported it weeks before, but nobody fixed it. We got the patient back, thank God, but it was close. Too close." Rebecca pulled out a small notebook and started writing, not typing on a phone or tablet, but actually writing with a pen. "What else?" "The previous administrator, he never left his office. We'd send him reports about problems, about safety concerns, and we'd get back these generic emails about budget constraints and working within our means. He came down to the ER once in 2 years, and that was for a photo op when the board visited. So when you saw me in the waiting room," Rebecca said slowly, "you saw another outsider who didn't understand what you deal with every day." Diana felt her face flush. "That's not an excuse for how I treated you." "No, but it's a reason. And reasons matter." Rebecca took a sip of her coffee. "Diana, can I be honest with you?" "Please." "I came to this hospital because I heard it was struggling. The board painted a picture of financial difficulties and aging infrastructure, but they didn't mention the staff issues. They didn't mention that the people who keep this place running are being ignored and overworked." Rebecca leaned forward. "That incident this morning, as uncomfortable as it was, told me more about this hospital's real problems than any report could have." Diana didn't know what to say to that. "You weren't wrong to enforce protocols," Rebecca continued. "You were wrong about who I was and what I was doing, but your instinct to protect patients and maintain standards, that's not something I want to discourage. That's something I want to support and channel properly." "I don't understand," Diana said quietly. "I embarrassed you in front of other staff. Why are you being so nice about it?" Rebecca smiled. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly the same situation, but I've been the person who's so exhausted and frustrated that I snap at the wrong moment. I've been the one who cares so much that it comes out as anger because there's nowhere else for it to go." She paused. "And I've been lucky enough to have people give me grace when I needed it. I'm just passing that forward." Diana felt the tears she'd been holding back all day finally spill over. She wiped at them quickly, embarrassed to be crying in front of the hospital administrator. "Hey," Rebecca said gently. "It's okay. It's been a long day." "A long year," Diana corrected, laughing weakly. "A long 5 years, actually." "Well, let's see if we can make the next year better." Rebecca pulled a tissue from her bag and handed it across the table. "I have a proposal for you." Diana wiped her eyes. "A proposal? I'm creating advisory committees for each major department. I need people who know the real problems, who aren't afraid to speak up, and who care enough to fight for changes. The emergency department committee needs a co-chair." Rebecca looked at her steadily. "I want it to be you." "Me?" Diana's voice came out as a squeak. "After what I did?" "Because of what you did. You spoke up when you saw something you thought was wrong. That's exactly the quality I need in someone who's going to help me fix this place." Rebecca pulled out a folder from her bag. "This committee will have real power, direct budget recommendations, policy input, monthly meetings with me to address concerns. I'm not interested in token gestures or people telling me what they think I want to hear. I need honest feedback from people who live in the trenches." Diana stared at the folder Rebecca pushed toward her. Inside, she could see bullet points about committee structure, meeting schedules, and scope of authority. "Why would you trust me with this?" Diana asked. "You barely know me. I know that you care. I know that you're willing to stand up for what you believe is right, even when it's uncomfortable. I know that you've stayed at this hospital through years of being ignored and undervalued because you care about your patients." Rebecca tapped the folder. "Those are exactly the qualities I need." Diana opened the folder and scanned the contents. It wasn't just busy work or empty promises. This was real authority to make recommendations about staffing levels, equipment purchases, and protocol changes. The kind of input that could actually fix the problems she'd been complaining about for years. "I don't know if I'm qualified for this," Diana admitted. "You're more qualified than you think. You know what works and what doesn't. You know where the system fails. You know what patients and staff need." Rebecca finished her coffee. "I'm not asking you to be a politician or a diplomat. I'm asking you to be honest about what needs to change." Diana thought about the broken crash cart, the endless double shifts because they couldn't keep staff, the supply shortages that made their jobs harder, the 1,000 small indignities and dangerous shortcuts that came from years of being told there wasn't enough money, enough time, enough priority given to emergency care. "If I do this," Diana said slowly, "I'm going to push hard for changes. Real changes. Not just fresh paint and motivational posters." Rebecca grinned. "That's exactly what I'm counting on, and I'm not going to sugarcoat things or pretend problems don't exist just because they're expensive to fix. Good, that's your job." Diana looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, and saw something she hadn't seen in an administrator before. Not just competence or intelligence, but genuine care. The kind of care that makes someone dress down and walk through a hospital incognito just to see the truth. The kind of care that turns a humiliating encounter into a gracious teaching moment. "Okay," Diana said, closing the folder and hugging it to her chest. "I'll do it. But I have one condition." "Name it." "We start with the crash carts. Every single one gets inspected and repaired or replaced within 2 weeks. No excuses." Rebecca pulled out her phone and typed a note. "Consider it done." "What else?" "We review staffing ratios. The current levels are dangerous. Already on my list. We'll address it in our first committee meeting." Rebecca stood up and extended her hand. "Welcome to the team, Diana." Diana shook her hand, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the vague, wishful kind of hope, but real, concrete hope based on someone who actually seemed to care and have the power to make changes. "Thank you," Diana said, "for everything. For being gracious this morning, for understanding, for this opportunity. Thank you for caring enough to speak up, even at the wrong moment," Rebecca replied. "That's the kind of passion this hospital needs." As Rebecca walked away, Diana sat back down and opened the folder again. Her hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from possibility. For the first time in a long time, she felt like things might actually get better. And it all started with the worst moment of her career turning into an unexpected second chance. 6 months later, Diana walked through the emergency department on a Tuesday morning and barely recognized it. Not because the walls were painted different colors or because they'd renovated the space. The physical building looked mostly the same, but everything else had changed. The waiting room had the same number of chairs, but fewer of them were filled. Patients were being seen faster. The triage system had been overhauled based on recommendations from Diana's committee, and it showed. What used to be 3-hour waits were now down to 45 minutes on average. Behind the nurse's station, the crash cart sat in its designated spot, and Diana knew without checking that it worked perfectly. All the equipment did. Rebecca had kept her promise about the 2-week deadline and then went further. Every piece of equipment in the emergency department had been inspected, repaired, or replaced. They finally had the tools they needed to do their jobs properly. "Morning, Diana," called Patricia, who was reviewing charts at the computer. "You're here early." "Committee meeting at 8, Diana replied, pouring herself a coffee from the break room. The coffee machine was new too. A small thing, but one that made a difference to staff who worked long hours. "Rebecca wants to discuss the new protocol proposals before presenting them to the board." Patricia smiled. 6 months ago, if someone told me I'd see you having regular meetings with the hospital administrator and calling her by her first name, I would have laughed. 6 months ago, if someone told me I'd be helping run this place, I would have quit on the spot," Diana admitted. "I thought all administrators were the same. People who cared more about spreadsheets than patients. Rebecca's different." "Yeah," Diana said quietly. "She really is." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. The Emergency Department Advisory Committee met every 2 weeks, and Rebecca attended every single meeting. Not just attended, actually participated. She listened to concerns, asked detailed questions, and most importantly, she acted on recommendations. When the committee identified that nurse burnout was the biggest threat to patient safety, Rebecca restructured the entire scheduling system. She hired 4 additional nurses, which meant no more forced double shifts. She implemented a mental health support program for staff. She created a policy that no one could be mandated to work more than 12 hours in a day, except in true emergencies. When they pointed out that outdated computer systems were wasting hours of nursing time each shift, Rebecca allocated budget for upgrades. The new system went live last month, and it cut documentation time in half. When Diana mentioned that staff felt disconnected from leadership, Rebecca started having lunch in the cafeteria every Wednesday, sitting with whoever happened to be there, asking questions and actually remembering the answers. People noticed. Staff who'd been 1 foot out the door, ready to quit, started staying. New hires who usually left after a few months were staying past their probation periods. The emergency department, which had been hemorrhaging experienced nurses for years, was finally stable. Diana checked her watch. She had 30 minutes before the meeting, enough time to check on a few patients. She was reviewing charts when she heard a commotion near the entrance. A young woman rushed in, carrying a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. The child was crying, her face bright red and blotchy. The mother looked panicked, that specific kind of fear that only parents of sick children understand. "Please, someone help," the mother called out. "She can't breathe right. I don't know what's wrong." Diana moved immediately, her training kicking in. "I've got you. Come with me." She guided them to a triage room, already assessing the situation. The little girl had hives developing on her arms, and her breathing was labored. "Allergic reaction, probably severe. When did this start?" Diana asked, keeping her voice calm while she grabbed supplies. 10 minutes ago. We were at breakfast and she had eggs for the first time, and then..." The mother's voice cracked. "Is she going to be okay?" "We're going to take care of her," Diana assured her. She pressed the emergency button, and within seconds another nurse appeared. They worked together smoothly, efficiently, administering medication and monitoring the child's response. The little girl's breathing started to ease, the hives began to fade. The mother collapsed into a chair, shaking with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Diana knelt down beside her. "She's going to be fine. We'll keep her for observation, but she's responding well to treatment. Looks like she has an egg allergy. We'll make sure you leave with information about how to manage it and what to watch for." "I was so scared," the mother whispered. "I thought I was going to lose her. I know. But you did exactly the right thing by bringing her straight here." Diana squeezed her hand. "You're a good mom." This must have been terrifying. The mother started crying, and Diana just sat with her for a moment, letting her release the fear. This was the part of nursing that couldn't be taught in school. The human part, the understanding that sometimes people just needed someone to acknowledge their terror and tell them it was okay to feel it. Later, after the little girl was stable and resting comfortably with her mother beside her, Diana headed to the administrative wing for her meeting. She thought about that moment 6 months ago when she'd snapped at Rebecca for doing essentially the same thing, trying to comfort a scared parent with a sick child. Diana had learned a lot since then. About leadership, about grace, about the difference between rules and compassion. Sometimes they aligned perfectly, sometimes they didn't. The key was knowing when to enforce protocols and when to remember that at the end of the day, they were all just humans trying to help other humans. Rebecca was already in the conference room when Diana arrived, along with 3 other committee members. The table was covered with reports, proposals, and the kind of detailed planning that Diana used to think was a waste of time. Now she understood it was how real change happened. "Diana, good," Rebecca said, looking up with a smile. "We were just reviewing your proposal for the pediatric fast-track system. It's excellent." They spent the next 2 hours going through recommendations, debating details, and planning presentations for the board. Rebecca treated every suggestion seriously, pushing back when something wasn't feasible but always offering alternatives. She never dismissed concerns or made anyone feel stupid for asking questions. At one point, Diana found herself disagreeing with Rebecca about staffing allocation. 6 months ago, she would have stayed quiet, afraid to contradict the person in charge. Now she laid out her reasoning clearly, backed by data the committee had collected. Rebecca listened, considered it, and changed her position. "You're right. I was looking at it from a budget perspective, but you're looking at it from a patient safety perspective. That has to come first." That's when Diana fully understood what made Rebecca different. She wasn't afraid to be wrong. She wasn't protecting her ego or her authority. She genuinely wanted the best solutions, regardless of where they came from. After the meeting ended and the others had left, Rebecca hung back. "Got a minute?" "Sure," Diana said, gathering her notes. "I wanted to tell you something. The board met last night, and they've been reviewing outcomes since I started. Patient satisfaction scores are up 32%. Staff retention is at the highest level in 8 years. Emergency department wait times have dropped significantly." Rebecca paused. They asked what changed. "You know what I told them?" Diana shook her head. "I told them about a nurse who cared so much about her patients that she was willing to yell at a stranger in the waiting room to protect them. I told them about how that nurse became the co-chair of a committee that revolutionized how we operate. I told them that real change doesn't come from administrators sitting in offices. It comes from empowering the people who do the actual work." Diana felt her throat tighten. "Rebecca, you changed this hospital, Diana, not me. I just gave you the platform to do it." "We did it together," Diana corrected. "And we're not done yet." Rebecca grinned. "No, we're definitely not done. I've got about 50 more ideas I want to run past your committee." As Diana walked back to the emergency department, she thought about that chaotic Monday morning 6 months ago. How she'd been drowning in frustration and exhaustion. How she'd lashed out at the wrong person at the wrong time. How she'd been certain her career was over. Instead, it had been a beginning. She'd learned that second chances were real. That good leaders didn't demand perfection, they demanded honesty. That speaking up, even imperfectly, was better than staying silent. That hospitals could change when the right people cared enough to fight for it. Diana passed by the waiting room and saw the mother and little girl from earlier. The child was laughing now, playing with a stuffed animal a nurse had given her. The mother caught Diana's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Diana smiled and nodded. This was why she became a nurse, not for the perfect days, but for the messy, complicated, beautiful moments when she got to make a real difference in someone's life. And now, thanks to an uncomfortable encounter and an unexpected friendship, she got to help make this hospital a place where those moments happened more often. Sometimes the worst days led to the best changes. You just had to be brave enough to keep going.